Missing? Hey, did you see the story in the two said gotcha? Haha! You didn't even see it coming, you stupid dummy. The Lost Metal by Brandon Bendersnatch. This is the latest release from the Cosmere, and the Cosmere team was nice enough to send me an ARC. Thank you. It also came with this sick map and newspaper, and I really love maps and newspapers, apparently. And I am having to work really hard to keep my reviewer brain kind of clear while reading this book, because not only was I sent an ARC, which is not that big a deal, it happens all the time, but I went to Dragonsteel, which was a Brandon Sanderson event or convention in Utah, and I had an absolute blast. I'm actually going to put a little review of that convention at the end of this video, so stick around for that if you'd like. But it was a genuinely awesome experience to be going through the Lost Metal while sitting down and meeting so many Cosmere fans. The problem with that, though, was I was really skeptical that I was even going to end up enjoying this one. Not because I'm not a Cosmere fan, duh, but because Era 2 of Mistborn so far has been probably my least favorite Cosmere writing. It kind of sat in that pretty mid for me territory where I just didn't love the characters that were presented. I thought the relationships were probably the strongest element of it, but the plot failed to grab me. Because Sanderson on stage in Dragonsteel said something very interesting about the Lost Metal. He said he is taking his gloves off when it comes to the Cosmere, and this is the most Cosmere connected book yet. Don't worry, I'm not going to get into it any more than that. It was something he said as a spoiler-free pitch for this book, so I feel comfortable saying it myself. And one of my favorite parts of the Cosmere is how light the tendrils of connection have been. I've anticipated as a fan of natural course of escalation for the Cosmere that these overlaps would start beginning, but this is an exponential increase when it comes to the Lost Metal. The only frustration I have is, like, for example, my friend Maddie right now, the co-host of Please Dear God Don't Be a Bomb, is currently reading the first era of Mistborn and loving it. But I now have to tell her, before you finish Era 2, you kind of have to read some of Stormlight's, some of this, some of that, and that's gonna be kind of annoying for some people, though for big Cosmere fans like me, it's really cool. And there's not really a right or wrong answer to that, right? You can be a very big Cosmere fan or just a really big Mistborn fan and not interested in the rest of the series, and it might make you a bit hesitant as someone who's just a Mistborn fan to continue forward with the series. And while I personally really like the Cosmere as a whole, that added to my hesitation going into the Lost Metal. It just seemed like a lot to put on the shoulders in the end of the second era of Mistborn. And with it not being that thick of a book for Sanderson, that's saying something about him as an author, I was afraid the end result would feel like maybe one of Marvel's worst movies where they're just kind of trying to always tell two stories. And there were certain parts of this book that did eke into that territory. But overall, as a larger Cosmere fan, I am absolutely floored. About at the halfway point of the Lost Metal, I was thinking this might be my least favorite Cosmere book yet, because there was so much happening. The stakes were already so high. I was so tense as a reader. I was thinking there's no way this book is going to be able to sustain this, and narratively, it's going to just drop off. No. The Sanderlanche here is of a certain scale. And moving away from that whole world angle of this, I really want to start talking about character. Shockingly, this actually might be my favorite characterization Sanderson has done since Way of Kings. I didn't like Wax and Wayne that much before going into this, but by the end of this book, it's like I got it. Not only was the humor from the relationship between Wax and Wayne landing much more significantly to me, and their chemistry just kind of popped off like nuts, but the development of the entire cast around them, which I cannot get into for many reasons, was sensational. And the balancing of the entire cast is admirable. Of course, Wax and Wayne are taking most of the spotlight. I would say the main reason I wasn't that big of a Wax and Wayne fan before the Lost Metal is I just feel like they weren't given that much development in their first three books. Yes, there's a lot of personality and their relationship can be a lot of fun, but with me not necessarily even loving the humor that was happening before the Lost Metal, I just kind of was predisposed to not be the biggest fan. But now in the Lost Metal, not only are we showing a bunch of development that's happened between a time jump between the last book and this book, but additionally we are given tons of meat to chew on throughout this book in terms of character development and final choices, especially in this book. Hurt. Wow, was I impressed with the display from Wayne in terms of being able to accept a certain decision that had to be made. But Wax as well had two emotional haymakers at the beginning and end that have finally allowed me to click with him. And yeah, I enjoy this Sanderson character as well, finally. Everyone feels like they're contributing, necessary. It's very lean for a book that's trying to do so much. And I think that's why it's actually working in what it's trying to be as a whole for the Mistborn series as well. It never felt like the Cosmere-related things were a bad Marvel movie where we're just like suddenly in a cave for no reason trying to tell another story. It's all woven in with extreme precision. And I'm trying to figure out logically, like, if Sanderson's suddenly taking the gloves off, how was the planning that clearly had to be done leading up to this so meticulous? Because it feels like there's so many things from so many different books that are lining up in this way that had to have been planned for a decade. Or is Sanderson just looking back and seeing what he could have done and doing it? Maybe that's even more impressive, because narratively this one is also a blast. But please remember, I am a massive world building nerd. I'm a son of Jordan. All that stuff of just kind of constantly connecting and pointing and allowing readers to discover and remember and notate is total candy for me. But if that's not your preference, you may have a bigger issue with what, yes, a fairly significant amount of this narrative is highlighting and showing as a cool anchor for bigger Cosmere fans. Originally from the second era of Mistborn, what I wanted, personally for my own preference, was it to feel more detective-y. And The Lost Metal is much more Sherlockian detective than anything else we've gotten from Mistborn so far, and I absolutely love that because, you know, I'm a giant Sherlock Holmes fan. Continuing the theme I've talked about recently, though, in a lot of my reviews of really just looking for books that emotionally do something for me, it's kind of incredibly jarring to go from reading Kindred to The Lost Metal, but they both hit emotionally in very different ways, where of course Kindred, it was like this emotionally devastating, like god topically politically heavy thing. The Lost Metal was just fun, cranked to 16 reference, and while of course it's not as thought-provoking, you still end up, especially towards the last 10% of this book, just having some moments where you're like, I'm okay. I'm gonna be okay. Where's my cat? I need to hug my cat. I had audible reactions to this repeatedly. Even on the flight back from Utah, there was a moment where I was kind of getting through to this where I had like a... and I noticed the woman next to me was like, what? I was a little nervous at this point as a Sanderson fan because his last few books I've been a little more iffy on. But if this as a whole is the direction the Cosmere is heading, I'm really happy. So while it doesn't overtake Way of Kings for my favorite Cosmere book, The Lost Metal might just be my second favorite. And I need to reread it before I say that for sure, because, you know, after I sit on it, emotions change. It could be number 1, maybe it's number 3. This is what the gloves being off feels like. Sanderson, keep them off and hit me harder. There was also some humor, I want to say, that definitely wasn't landing for me, and a couple of the exposition dumps were justified but excessive, if that makes sense. I might include in my spoiler-filled review at the beginning a quick what to read before reading The Lost Metal segment. That will be spoiler-free. But quickly, a word from today's sponsor. Oh, Daniel doesn't use real blades when he does these green screen things. Well, who looks like an idiot now? Wraithmark Creative has made it their mission to create premium deluxe editions of your favorite sci-fi fantasy indie books. Previously, only the bestsellers of traditionally published books could ever get this kind of treatment. But now with the rise of the indie scene, Wraithmark Creative is completely changing the game. This SPFBO winner, for those of you who don't know what that means it's just like a really, really good indie book and it beat out all the other indie books that year, has already smashed Wraithmark Creative's funding goal, which means if you back it now, with only a limited amount of time left, you're guaranteed to get this version of Sword of Kagan, a book I highly recommend. Did I just self-promo in an ad spot? You're goddamn right I did. With this version, you're going to be getting high-quality offset printing, a cloth-wrapped hardcover and foil-stamped case, an embossed dust jacket, art by Felix Ortiz. Yeah, I worked with him. I like him too. A full custom silver-foiled page edges and a custom interior design by STK Creations. And for those of you who are extra big fans of ML Wong, you also get a signed bookmark. I've seen Wraithmark Creative's deluxe editions before. They are up there with the best of the best. So if you're a fan of this book or you just want to support an indie author or an indie publisher, check out the link in the description down below and order a premium version of Sword of Kagan today. Get to Dragonsteel! It's 3 p.m. on a Thursday. I'm thinking Dragonsteel starts Saturday. I am not right. So I fly out to Utah and learn that I arrived 2 days early. But it's actually really pleasant because Utah is wonderful and Salt Lake City is gorgeous. The mountains around it, it's like you're in a little bowl of hugging. You don't really care about that though, because you just want to know what the actual convention was like. Is Sanderson even really there, or is it just one of his writing clones? The con was an absolute blast, and I actually don't know. What's really important to me at a convention is it doesn't feel like I'm just there to spend as much money as possible on merchandise that was made as cheaply as as it could be while watching a series of celebrities go on panels whose careers are on the decline and they're just trying to rake in as much money as they can. That's not what I really wanted at a convention. Fortunately, Dragonsteel is pretty much the exact opposite of that. Now, while a lot of the merch was pretty expensive, its quality was like immaculate. Super soft shirts, leather bounds left and right, all kinds of fun like plushies and things, and that's just for the Sanderson part of it. The rest of the exhibition hall was filled with some of the most talented authors that are currently putting out books. I'm talking Brian McClellan. I got to sit down with Mary Robinette Cole. Even the quality of like just the average goer of the convention was sensational. So many of you were so kind and excited to talk to me. It was incredibly flattering. You laughed at my terrible jokes on stage, and I absolutely should have won that super fight. Are you kidding me? So I know there's just a lot of people out there who have to really budget and figure out which conventions they want to go to that year. And for me, Dragonsteel is going to be one that I try to go to every year. No, I wasn't paid to go there. Paid for my own flight and hotel. Was just given a ticket for free for full disclosure, and that's my honest thoughts. Definitely think it's like one of my go-to conventions now. But this has just been your latest book review / con review, that's the new one for me. Let me know what your thoughts on The Lost Metal were in the comments down below. Did you like it as much as me? Are you concerned? Are you excited? Did you burn through it in a day and now you're regretting that decision because you didn't properly spread it out to enjoy? That's what I did, but I had to for my job. Speaking of, I have books of my own and merch. I don't know, this is the outro I'm doing. Goodbye!